Hey ghouls and gals, welcome back to my channel. My name is Taylor and today is a very exciting video for me. This vlog is going to be me reading 3 anticipated releases for March. I have ARC copies of 3 March releases and I thought it would be a really good idea to do a March ARC reading vlog because number one, I have to keep up with my NetGalley percentage. I really want to make sure this year that I am staying on top of my NetGalley arcs and reading them in a timely manner. And then reason number 2 is because I secured an arc of what is one of my most anticipated releases of the whole entire year, and I knew that I wanted to vlog it, but it does have like a review embargo, so I can't post this until March. I'm filming this at the very beginning of February, but I did not want to not film this reading experience because I just have a really good feeling about this batch of arcs. So in this vlog, I will be reading 3 March releases. I will be reading Blood on Her Tongue by Johanna van Veen. This comes out March 24th. I will be reading Freakslaw by Flett. This comes out March 31st. And then last but not least, one of my most anticipated releases of the year, The Buffalo Hunter by Stephen Graham Jones. This one comes out March 17th. So very exciting reading vlog. I'm really hoping that I love all 3 of these books. So without further ado, let's just go ahead and get started. I'm starting off this reading vlog with Blood on Her Tongue by Johanna van Veen. So I am 50% of the way through Blood on Her Tongue and I am absolutely obsessed with this one. I'm really loving it, and I don't want to jinx myself, but it's absolutely giving one of my favorite books of the year vibes. I love a vampire story, and this is such a good blend of borrowing elements from classics before it and reimagining them and adding a new spin, and I'm just absolutely obsessed. First of all, the cover is perfect. The cover is perfect and really showcases the beautiful and the dark and the grotesque of this gothic tale. I have read one thing from Johanna van Veen before this, My Darling Dreadful Thing, and I did enjoy it. I'm loving this one so much more though. So this is her second novel, and I think by the time I finish this one, it's really going to cement her as an auto read author for me. I love this one. So the setup, we are following Lucy, and at the very beginning of this story, she gets an urgent telegram from her sister's husband that her sister is deathly ill. Lucy and her sister Sarah are twins, and they're obviously very close, not just because they are twins, but because they are very close siblings. So she immediately gets on a train, goes to her sister's aid, and when she reaches her sister is on death's doorstep. Her sister is not eating anything, not drinking anything, and is having these delusional ramblings of being so insatiably thirsty, but also how she's so scared of a woman. We, the reader, and Lucy slowly find out that the woman that Sarah is scared of is actually a bog woman, a body that one of the workers found on the estate of Sarah and her husband, and they exhumed this body when they were doing work on the ground. It's a bog body. It was preserved by the environment, so it was like a natural mummy, and the way in which this body buried was very interesting and very curious, and Sarah was investigating that before she fell ill. So I love the tropes of this one. This is just such decadent and disturbing gothic, and I love the bog body aspects of this one and the vampirism. It is grotesque. There's a lot of body horror having to do with decomposing bodies and bodies that are so ill and like the breaking down of an otherwise healthy body to something that is not. And I just am eating this up, pun intended, I suppose, but I just am having so much, I don't want to say fun, but I love this. I love this so much. It feels very reminiscent of classics like Dracula or Carmilla or even Nosferatu, the new movie that just came out. And I'm really enjoying this one. I have a really great feeling about just the way that this story is going, and then just also the writing style and the prose is immaculate. So I'm going to go dive back in. I'm going to finish this one up and I will check back in and let y'all know my final thoughts. So I finished Blood on Her Tongue by Johanna van Veen, and this book, I loved it. I loved it. This is one of my favorite books of the year. I know it's pretty early in the year, but I would be surprised if this didn't show up in my favorites of the year. I'm gonna be honest. I really, really loved this one. I actually read Johanna van Veen's other book in January this year, My Darling Dreadful Thing, and I did enjoy it. I enjoyed it a lot. I was excited to check out more by the author, and this book, I just loved it even more. And I love this book. If you're a vampire person, if you especially love the vampire classics, gothic vampires, I think you're going to want to check this one out. This one is as if, you know, you took the sapphicness of Carmilla and then you also took from Nosferatu, if you took the kind of monstrosity of vampires, and you also took the relationship between Ellen and her friend Anna, I believe. Yes, her friend's name is Anna, the one played by Emma Corrin. And if you take that relationship, that strong female bond, the friendship of that, if Nosferatu was centered around that relationship, you add in a dash of Carmilla. This is by no means a Carmilla retelling, but I think people who love the sapphic vampires of Carmilla and just the overall ambiance and just mixing this is just such a great gothic story. I loved this one. This one hits on a lot of traditional themes in gothic literature and just makes them so fresh and so new, and I absolutely loved this one. I loved that we focused on sisters, and I loved the vampire lore. It feels very traditional and very new at the same time. I don't want to give too much away about that because it is fun to uncover and learn exactly how vampire mechanics work, but I loved this one. It was so good. Johanna van Veen is absolutely going to be an auto-buy author for me at this point. I cannot wait until this book comes out because this cover is just so gorgeous, and this is one where the cover absolutely gives the ambiance and the vibe that you're going to find in this book. This is such a descriptive book, and just for all of the reasons, the atmosphere, the setting just was perfect for a vampire book, and I ate it up. This one was just really, really great. It comes out March 25th, so I would highly recommend y'all go check this book out, especially if you love gothics, if you love vampires, and especially also if you loved My Darling Dreadful Thing by Johanna van Veen. I think you're gonna love this one even more. This is an author that I'm so excited to see where her career goes because she just has such a love for the craft and a love for gothic storytelling. You can tell this is very well researched. It takes place in the 1800s and it feels like that. It absolutely feels like a book that could have been written in the 1800s, so it feels contemporary in that way, very true to the time period. And yeah, I can't say enough good things about this one. Highly recommend y'all check it out. I as well will be purchasing a physical copy to keep on my shelves because I absolutely love the cover and I love the story inside. So moving on, we are going to switch tones significantly. We are diving into Freakslaw by Jane Flett. This one, just from the cover and synopsis, is going to be very different than Blood on Her Tongue. This is a glittery and crackling horror debut about a traveling carnival of troublemakers who arrive in a small Scottish town and perform their favorite pastime, revenge. So very intrigued by this one, and I'm gonna go get to reading. I'll check back in at the 50% mark and let y'all know how I'm feeling about it. So right now I'm about 40% of the way through Freakslaw, and I wanted to give a little bit of a disclaimer. I'm not exactly sure when this book is coming out. When I got the NetGalley arc, it said it was coming out at the end of March, but it also says, looking on Goodreads, that it's expected April, the 1st of April, and it also has a release date. Apparently it came out last year in some sort of limited fashion, but it is getting re-released this year, either the very last day of March or the very first day of April. This is potentially an April arc instead of a March arc, but either way, keep an eye for it around that time. But 40% of the way in, and I don't know how I feel about this one. Honestly, if this wasn't a NetGalley arc, I might have DNF'd it just because I'm not really getting along with this one, and particularly when we're juxtaposing it with the other book that I've read for this vlog, Blood on Her Tongue, which is one of my favorite books of the year. It's been a while since I gave that Blood on Her Tongue update, and it's remained one of my favorite books of the year so far, but this one, it's just, I'm reading it for NetGalley. I probably would have DNF'd it had I just checked it out from the library, but I am trying to read and review all the books that I get from NetGalley because I take it kind of seriously. I'm trying to take it very seriously this year that publishers have trusted me to review these books ahead of time and give detailed reviews for them. So that is why I'm finishing it. There is nothing that I necessarily hate about this one so far, and like on its premise, it should be one of it should be a book that I really enjoy because we are following pretty much an entire town, an entire population of people, and I love books like Needful Things by Stephen King that do that same sort of concept where we have a couple core characters, but we occasionally just get like perspectives from a variety of different townspeople. So we are following a troupe, a freak show, in heavy quotes there. There is a note at the beginning of this book letting readers know that even though this takes place in the 1990s and there's some terminology that is used that isn't used today, it's there for historical accuracy, and there were also sensitivity readers. So we are following Freakslaw, and it is a traveling carnival, and it has a lot of the typical standard attractions if you think of what we would think of if you think of a quote-unquote freak show. We've got contortionist, we have conjoined twins, we have a werewolf boy, we also have a witch named Nancy, and one of the kind of blurbs at the beginning of this book was a quote from The Craft. So Nancy is a witch. She's one of the main characters. She is on the younger side. This almost kind of feels like YA because a lot of the main characters that we're following are teenagers. But we're following Nancy and this entire fun fair of travelers as they arrive in this incredibly repressed Scottish town, and we're seeing that there is just clash after clash from these repressed townspeople. It's a very small conservative town, and then the fun fair is just very lively. It's got a lot of different types of people that these townspeople are not used to seeing, and then the way that they live their life and the values of the two groups are vastly different. So there is this struggle. There's something that is brewing on in the underneath of this that we haven't touched upon yet. I'm sure it's going to be the climax of the book, but for right now we are seeing the villagers and then also the people that work at Freakslaw, and it's kind of tensions are rising, and I'm sure they'll rise to a fever pitch, but for right now we're just introducing the circus that has come to town and all of the different main characters. This is a world where magic is clearly real. Nancy is a witch, and you see the ways in which her spells, and not just Nancy but other people that live and work at Freakslaw, they have magical abilities that that influences nature and the world around them, which is interesting. The number one thing that I know is very intentional about this book that I'm just really not loving is that it's very gross at all times, and I know that's intentional, but it's really giving me the ick, for lack of a better word. Like, every single description that happens is just a very gross description. And to give an example that's non-spoilery, we have a character who is eating candied nuts, and the way that she's eating candied nuts and the way that that is being described is really gross. So every single thing is being described in a gross way. I'm not one of these people, but if you are a person who, I forget the term for this, but some people, you know, when they're eating, they can't stand the sound of other people chewing. The description in this book kind of makes you feel like the author is intentionally trying to make you feel that way about every single thing that's going on. So I don't necessarily love that, and I don't necessarily love the topics of future and consent that is kind of happening with the witchcraft right now. But 40% of the way in, I'm sure maybe that will change as the book goes on. I am interested in, there's kind of something that's been introduced and hinted at a particular reason why Freakslaw has come to this particular town. So I am curious to see that, and I think it's a very interesting concept. So I will keep on reading, but so far it's not something that I'm absolutely loving. It's not something that I'm dying to pick up. But when I sit down to read it, I am invested and I'm flying through it pretty quickly. So yeah, I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. I'm going to go finish this one up, and then I will check back in later once I've finished it and give y'all my final review. So I did finish Freakslaw, and unfortunately this one just overall was kind of a miss for me. The things that I was mentioning in the first 50% of this book didn't get better by the end. Just the pacing for this one and the focus on the plot and little snippets of following a lot of different characters within both the town and the carnival. I just think that for me as a character-driven reader, just didn't really hit the potential of what I wanted this story to do. A lot of times, just with the way that it was written, it did feel like a series of vignettes or a series of short stories as opposed to one cohesive novel. So I didn't really love this one. It had a lot of potential, honestly. At its best moments, this did really remind me of what I love about books like Something Wicked This Way Comes, because we have a carnival, a place that's supposed to be a really fun, exciting experience, and you slowly peel away the layers and there's something not so fun underneath. However, this one, I just felt like we didn't get enough time with that idyllic outside at first, because you have to kind of lure people in for a premise like this one and have things seem great and then slowly start to peel away the layers until you get to the decay within. And I just felt like overall this story, it didn't really dive into things with the depth and the complexity that I felt like were needed to make this story just an absolute standout for me. A lot of the dichotomies that were presented in this book, just a lot of the concepts were very black and white, this or that, and the characters and the different dynamics and the things that were going on, I felt like all needed more fleshing out than that. The characters all felt very one-dimensional, and the plot is a little bit uneven because in part we have all these vignettes. We see every single different character almost in the carnival, and then a lot of different characters in the town, and it just felt like very flat, for lack of a better word. Now this one I would really recommend to people who love American Horror Story and who in particular love the freak show season. For me, quite like how I feel about American Horror Story most of the time, the premise was super interesting. The first 2 chapters or so, the first couple of chapters were really engaging, and then just the ending and the overall execution of the premise fell a little flat. I will say I look to be in the minority. A lot of people are really, really loving this one. I think it has a 4 point something on Goodreads, which is on the higher side for a horror novel. So if you're really intrigued by this premise, definitely still give it a try, because different strokes for different folks. People like different things, and just because this didn't work for me doesn't mean that it can't work for you. So this one comes out, again, I was seeing a lot of different release dates, but the most common one looks to be April 1st. So even though this is a March ARCs vlog, this does come out April 1st potentially. So check it out at the end of March, beginning of April, if you are interested in this very interesting carnival horror. Now we are moving on to the last book in this vlog, and it's one of my most anticipated books of the year, The Buffalo Hunter Hunter by Stephen Graham Jones. Now I have actually the e-arc from NetGalley, and then I also have an advanced listener copy from Libro.fm. So I have the opportunity to switch back and forth. There are multiple narrators in the audiobook, so I'm definitely looking forward to reading it physically, listening to the audiobook. One of my most anticipated books of the whole entire year. I really love Stephen Graham Jones. I love vampires. This is told in an epistolary format, and it's about vengeance in the Wild West. So I'm gonna go get to reading this one. I cannot wait. I'll check back in later with another reading update. So I am now 40% of the way through The Buffalo Hunter Hunter by Stephen Graham Jones, and I am really, really loving this one so far. I am actually really glad that I have arcs of both the audiobook and the ebook, because I'm listening to the audiobook as I'm reading the ebook, and it is such an immersive experience, and I'm really loving this one. Stephen Graham Jones, at least from what I've read of him, but I believe this is his very first historical horror, and I love that. I love that he has such a distinctive writing style, and I was a little curious to see how he would approach a historical horror and an epistolary horror, and it's really, really working. I'm really enjoying it. It's definitely got like those historical horror vibes, and I feel really immersed when I'm reading it. Like I actually feel, I buy into the fact that I'm reading real letters from 1912. So at the very start of this book, we follow Etsy Bucharn, and she is a professor who is desperately trying to reach tenure, and to do this she needs to publish something, and she's looking for inspiration, looking for a good subject to write a book or a paper on, and in a construction project that is unrelated to her but soon will be, a diary is discovered hidden within a wall, and this diary is actually the diary of her, she calls it her greatest grandfather, so great, something like that, grandfather, who was a preacher during the late 1800s, early 1900s. So she is going to read this journal and hopefully use it as inspiration for a project. She feels connected to this project because it is her ancestor. So she starts to read, and it is not like what she expects. So we then follow Arthur Bucharn, who is her greatest grandfather, and he is a Lutheran pastor in a very small town, and he is detailing his day-to-day life, and then all of a sudden the diary switches to him talking about a very interesting character that appeared in his church one day and is giving a confession, which is very par for the course when it comes to being a pastor, being a man of the cloth, but this confession is very different. It's from a very interesting Indian named Goodstab, and the story he starts to tell, one of things that lurk in the night, that drink blood, that are hell-bent on seeking revenge, are nothing like what Arthur has ever heard before. So we're following like a diary within a diary as Arthur is transcribing this account that Goodstep has, and I'm really getting along with this one so far. The biggest thing that I want to mention at like the 40% point is the fact that while this is not a detractor for me, I feel like it's going to be a detractor for a lot of people. Stephen Graham Jones Jones typically does have such a unique and interesting writing style. I feel like if I pick up a book and read it, if you had blocked out all of the information on the cover, I could tell it's Stephen Graham Jones because he has such a distinctive writing style, and that writing style is very hit or miss for people. I really like it. A lot of other people like find it really hard to get into, and I can totally understand that. I think this takes it a step further because the letters and the story of Good Stab is written like someone who is living through 1912 would write it. So it does feel very, very true to the time, and it feels like, you know, if you read like a classic book, it reads a little bit different than a lot of books that are written in modern day. It reads very true to the time, but that might make this book a little bit of a slog for some people. Honestly, I recently read Dan Simmons' The Terror, and I really liked the immersive aspects of that book, but like it fell flat for me. So this is what I wanted from that Dan Simmons very immersive, very slow moving, almost kind of like gothic story. It's a story of the West, and I really like the perspectives and the stories that this is going over based on that narrative that I feel like a lot of Americans think of the West a certain way and then maybe don't think of like the bigger picture or a lot of causes and effects of things that happened during that time. So I'm really enjoying that. I'm really enjoying the slow burn and just how immersive and historical this feels. So I'm gonna go get to reading. I'll check back in later when I'm done. So I finished The Buffalo Hunter Hunter, and I really, really loved this one. It definitely feels to me like it's going to be a vampire classic in years to come. I really enjoy the work of Stephen Graham Jones, and I have to say I think this is my favorite book that he has ever written. This really feels like a book that was written for me, even though it was definitely not like written just for me, but just all of the things that I love about genre fiction. We have historical fiction, we have a Western that doesn't like glorify aspects or shy away from the uncomfortable truth of westward expansion in America and what white settlers did to the people that lived there before, and then also just horror with vampires. Like all of those are elements for a perfect horror novel for me, and this one definitely did not disappoint. Stephen Graham Jones has a very distinctive writing style, and I just think it works so well in this epistolary format. His writing style feels very stream of consciousness or conversational a lot of the time, and that just worked really, really perfectly for this book. Now, I don't think this book is going to be for everyone. It's a very heavy book for a lot of reasons, but it really, really leans into the historical elements. It's very much written like a classic, and like I mentioned at the beginning of this update, I think this is going to be considered a vampire classic, a horror classic for years to come from now, a modern classic, but it is definitely written like a classic book. And what I mean by that is that the journal entries that are written in 1912 feel so true to the time. Like I don't have to suspend my disbelief a great deal when I was reading this book, because I felt like I actually was reading a journal from a person. I felt like I was reading a history book that has like passages of letters or journals from people who lived through those times. This book felt like that. It very much read like historical fiction, and I loved that. I loved that very immersive writing experience, but I do know that not everyone is going to enjoy that kind of prose. It's very, very like dense and classics leaning, but I absolutely loved it. I loved the way that this was a story within a story within a story, and the way that all three of those parts really felt unique, and they all felt like their own stories, as opposed to, I felt like with Etsy in particular, like that could have just been a framing device or framing narrative narrative to focus on the historical elements of this book, and even her story had so much weight and depth to it. I really loved this one. If you like vampire novels, I would go ahead and check this one out. I like the interesting vampire lore and the way in which this really does feel like being a vampire is such a curse and a way to take an individual just away from their humanity. The ways in which that was explored was so cool. So if you're a vampire lover, check this one out. If you like historical horror or Western horror, this is also going to be a book that you're going to want to read. This one comes out March 18th, and I already have 2 copies coming to me. I have the Barnes & Noble edition, and I have another edition that is coming in a book box subscription that I signed up for just so I could get the special edition of this book. I am so glad that I was able to read the ARC. The audiobook is absolutely fantastic as well. There are 3 narrators and they all do a really excellent job, so definitely check this one out. I had such a fun time reading these books for this vlog, and it was very successful. So all these books are coming out in March or the beginning of April. Make sure to check them out if any of them sound interesting to you. Obviously, Freakslaw was one where it wasn't my personal favorite, but I think if you love American Horror Story, if you love carnival horror, then you could really get along with this one. Blood on Her Tongue is the one that I would recommend just the most broadly. I think it has the most broad appeal, especially if you watched Nosferatu and you loved that and you love Carmilla. I think you'll want to check this one out. I think it has just like the most broad appeal. It's a great gothic. And then The Buffalo Hunter by Stephen Graham Jones is for my historical horror and vampire horror loving friends. But I had a great time with this vlog. 2 of the books are going to be, they're contenders for my favorite books at the end of the year. So this was definitely a very successful vlog. If you enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up, leave a comment down below, leave like a vampire emoji since this vlog was very vampire heavy. Subscribe to my channel so you don't miss any of my content. Stay safe, stay spooky, and I will see y'all in the next video. Bye!